over from the BE collection. It is 4/24/2023, and we're here interviewing today Gail Rolf. So thank you for being here. So how did you happen? Are you a native Californian?
No, born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Mhm.
And my family moved out to California when I was 6 years old. And our first home for a year was an apartment in Hollywood that we absolutely hated. But my parents did find a house in Tarzana in 1955. And no one had heard of Tarzana at that point in the San Fernando Valley. And it was chicken ranches and orange groves, country roads. And since then, of course, the San Fernando Valley has boomed, but I was raised in Tarzana most of my life.
You have siblings?
I have an older sister, and she's married with 2 children and 3 grandchildren. And my nephew, her son, lives close by, and her daughter lives up in Washington.
Hold on a minute, we're having helicopter interference. Okay. Any homosexuals in your family besides yourself that you know about?
Well, I have a first cousin who identified as gay and married and with a child, and has just recently passed away due to health problems. And outside of that, that's the only self-identified LGBTQ person that I am aware of in my family. Now, there could be others, but our family has been shrinking over the years in terms of cousins and so on and so forth, due to death and distance and just separation.
I'm just asked that out of curiosity, and actually what we're finding out of the women we've interviewed, there's probably about 95% genetic link. So just.
Yeah, so he would be related on my mother's side, on that side of the family.
So I can tell you about the collection, or we can, and you know about the archiving. We archive with the Mazer lesbian collection, but we also archive at Cal State Jamaica Hills, and they connect with other universities. One of the reasons we started this was to reach out to people, students perhaps, and give them information about lesbians and their careers and our challenges, what we've done, where we are today. And it's been very effective. We didn't know what we were doing. I knew I liked people's stories. I'm a therapist as well as a nurse. And of course, Marge heard a lot of stories and it was COVID. We didn't have anything to do. We were locked up, so to speak. So we said, well, let's try this. So this is where we are today. And it's all referral. So you're absolutely valuable in that regard. And I'm sure many others. I can see.
Oh, I'll follow up with some of my referrals that I made. And
thank you. If they call me and go to, I'll give you the webpage information again. And if they, it makes sense, it goes to YouTube also, but the webpage dresses it up and it makes you think, well, maybe this is a valid.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And then I'll reach out to some specific people who I think their stories are very worthwhile and should definitely be in the archives. So I'll do a personal reach.
Great. So how did you evolve to the woman you are today when you moved to California?
Well, I grew up very insecure, very feeling that I was the only person like me in the whole world, not knowing, of course, back in the 1950s when you're a child, that there are people that love people of the same sex. And for that reason, I knew very early that I was different and not normal. And I didn't know what the word was, but I knew as a young child. I started having crushes early on older women. And of course, I couldn't explain it, but I knew it was unusual and it wasn't normal because girls are not supposed to have crushes on other girls or women. So
How old
I
were
had
you,
a
do you
very-
think?
I had a very difficult time growing up and, struggling with my sexual identity as many people do. But of course, now I'm aware of that.
Right.
But back then,
You
of
weren't the
course, I
only
was,
person.
pardon?
You weren't the only person struggling.
Right.
Right.
And now as an adult, I know I wasn't alone, but as a child, you feel very, very alone and very isolated. And it was scary. And for that reason, my relationship, especially with my mother, was very strained because the expectations, of course, were you're going to grow up, you're going to get married, and you're going to have children, and we'll have grandchildren. And I knew very clearly on. I remember at age 4 pronouncing I was never going to get married and
That was
never have
early.
children. I stood on the sidewalk by myself in Cleveland, Ohio, Cleveland Heights, Ohio, pronouncing that. And I remember saying it. I remember that moment.
Were you alone?
Pardon?
Were you alone?
I was alone when
Uh-huh.
I made that pronouncement. I just had to
Good
yell
for
it.
you.
I had to yell it. I remember that. It was very cathartic. And so, like so many of us, my childhood was very difficult. And of course, I did contemplate suicide a lot as a child and as a young adult, teenager and young adult. But I never made a serious attempt, thank goodness. And my outlet was athletics. And I think that's what saved me, is that I was a very good athlete and I competed in tennis and volleyball and other sports. And that was my focus, is I wanted to be a good athlete. And if I'm a good athlete, number one, I have to stay alive to be a good athlete.
Mhm.
And I surrounded myself with other athletes whose focus also was just simply to be a good athlete. And we formed friendships. And it had nothing to do with sexuality. I assumed that all those friendships that I had, all those women were, and men too, were straight. And I was the only one who was in the closet and hiding my, at that time, we referred to it as homosexuality, but hiding my queerness and just deathly afraid of anyone finding out that I was indeed a lesbian. I don't even think the word lesbian existed or it wasn't
I'm
popular.
concerned it's going to go
It
out
wasn't
of vogue.
popularized at that time. So the term still was homosexual.
Mhm.
And
That was difficult to say. That was a
Pardon?
very large word.
Pardon?
I found it difficult to say I am a homosexual.
Well, I could never
Very
say it.
big,
I think today I can't even say it. I don't use that
really.
term for a lot of reasons. It was a popular term in Nazi Germany, and Hitler helped to popularize that term. So I stay away from that word. It's not a comfortable term for me. But moving on, and how did I evolve, and how
Well,
did
let's go. I think that sports, we think of Title IX, et cetera, but like Marge, you can relate to her sports salvation, so to speak.
Plus, it's an activity that sort of settles you down.
Well, it's cathartic also.
Yeah.
Because you're releasing the endorphins and you're and there's a lot of internal anger and self-hate. I mean, you grew up as I did with a lot of self-hate, internalized, that internalized homophobia. I didn't know the word for it at the time because you're not normal. And I did date men. I almost did get married, and I'm quite happy that I made a choice not to. And the man that I had been with for many, many years was a wonderful, wonderful man. And he loved me deeply. And I knew that I couldn't return the love in the same way. And I didn't want to destroy his life. And oddly enough,
How old were you then?
well, that would be back in the 70s. So I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And we were together on and off for 7 years. And but he's back in my life as a friend, and he's still deeply, he's with another woman. He's been with her for many years, and I'm very happy for him. And he's had a wonderful life, and he and I have talked, and he's just a terrific guy. And he, I'm glad that it's an amicable relationship, because I didn't want to break his heart. He was too good a guy for that, and he needed to move on in his life, and I needed to move on in mine. But what happened?
Suicide is one of the reasons we heard of a young girl who we knew when she was about 5 or 6 or younger. And I heard from her mother when we moved back to Mount Washington that she had tried to kill herself. And she was really working at it. She was hospitalized at UCLA for several days. She went to the center, was in therapy, and it was because of her coming out, as well as the abuse that went on with her father when she was growing up. So I thought, if so many of us have had suicide ideation, and she actually took many steps to really secure that she was going to be successful. So I thought, if she could read in her school, she was in college at the time, something about us, something about people like yourself. And if we saved her through our interviews, think of how many people we haven't. So if just one person has their life saved because of what we're doing here, what you're doing, what we're doing together, I think this is worth it. So that was one of the motivating factors.
We can't save everyone.
We don't know who we don't
but
save.
I think having dialogue, sharing stories is very, very important. It's sort of like an octopus. We have tentacles, and we touch people, and we embrace people. So how did I become the person I am? Well, I did grow up like so many of us in the 50s in a very segregated world. Los Angeles was segregated by design. It wasn't by the choice of our families necessarily. Everybody was moving out west after World War II. Our fathers had the GI loans, and they could buy property, and a business opportunity came up with a family member. And so and Ohio was a horrible place to live. Just the weather was a horrendous place. And so my family up and came out and got into the business with my uncle. And that's how we wound up here. And but Los Angeles was very segregated, and that was by design, by the city planners, by the real estate industry, and so on. And that's a whole other story.
I was going to say, I didn't really think of it that way.
If you were white and of a particular faith or socioeconomic background, this is what you could afford. They would take you to and show you these houses here or there. And many times.
How'd you find that out?
Yeah, they took you to communities, where if you are Catholic or you're Jewish or you're Baptist or whatever your religion, well, you want to have a lot of the communities centered around their religious institutions. And so that's how we wound up in the West San Fernando Valley, was because of what my parents could afford. And we had some friends that also moved from Ohio that lived in Tarzana. And that's what drew us there. And so the San Fernando Valley was a very, very segregated place. And I didn't wind up going to school and having a professor of color or a classmate of color until I was a junior in college. And so this plays a role, because I did ultimately wind up as an inner city school teacher. And that changed my life.
Was that your major? Was education your major in college?
Education. I became a health education teacher, and I wound up in the Los Angeles Unified School District ultimately, because I was a baby boomer and it was very hard to get jobs back then, and wound up in an inner city junior high school. predominantly Black. And it was a brand new experience for me. And it was a real eye-opener. And it changed, I think it changed my life more than I changed. Like, it's mutual, because I'm still in touch with many of the students. And this is back in the 1970s, to give you a time frame. And
that's helpful, the time frames, because we're studying the generation, what went on in our generation and different ones.
Yeah. So we changed each other's lives, and there were a lot of very rough moments. Many teachers got attacked, students got attacked. Prior to my teaching at that school, students had been killed. And my friend who got me into the school, you actually had to know somebody to get a job in the inner city back then. That's how difficult it was to get teaching jobs. And her entree, or her introduction, was, oh, they only killed 3 students and hospitalized 1 teacher and stole 1 car. Come to my school, you'll love the kids. And I
Right.
said, huh? And
to work with, right?
yeah, it was an amazing experience. And I'm still very close to many of the students who and their families who graduated from that school. We have remained dear, dear friends. And of course, they are grandparents and great grandparents now. And it's just, I get chills talking about it because of all the wonderful experiences. And there were a lot of very tough experiences, but I also taught in a school prior to that with really—
When was your first relationship with a woman?
Oh, my first relationship was, it was sort of scary. It was a friend, and it wasn't even a relationship. It was just sort of just a fling, but it wasn't a relationship. I did wind up realizing that I needed to deal with my own sexuality, and I needed to get okay with who I was. So I got involved with a lesbian support group. And
What was the name of it?
it was just a therapy group. So there was no
therapy group?
There was no name. It was a therapist who ran the group. And it was my first time living, I mean, knowing other lesbian women, because I was teaching and living. I was living in the South Bay. Nobody was out. Nobody was out. I didn't know a single other gay or lesbian person back then. I just, or knowingly, who was out. Nobody was out. So of course you didn't know who was who, and you kept your mouth shut. And where I lived was very conservative, extremely conservative back then. And it was scary. I mean, I was confronted by, I was a tennis player. So at the local tennis club, often I would be confronted by other tennis players, and they would tell me what they thought should happen, that there should be public hangings of all gang members, like they do in Saudi Arabia. I mean, we had people would just say those things to me when I'm going off to play tennis. So it was pretty horrifying for me to even go to the tennis courts, because people would just say these awful things, and they were all race-based. And I thought,
sort of frightening.
Not even safe to share my religion with them, let alone talk about what I do on a day-to-day basis. So it was not a pleasant place to live for me. It was not a really safe place, but I did live in the South Bay for many, many years. And then ultimately, I got okay with myself. I went into therapy with a therapist and got okay with who I was, and realized it's the rest of the world that needs fixing, not me. And now I'm ready to have a relationship, but how do I have that? And so I got involved early on with SCWU, the Southern California Women for Understanding, which was a large social group for really women who were almost all in the closet. And for those women, and many of them were married and had families, and they couldn't be out, and they risked losing their jobs if they were out.
I was in group therapy with children. Two of the women that founded that.
Pardon?
I was in group therapy as a client, And two of the women that founded SCWU were part of that group.
Yeah.
So that was,
And
it was
I
exciting.
always-
I was in a relationship at the time and I was wishing, I said, wow, that sounds like a great opportunity. But
were you in a relationship with a man or a woman?
a woman,
Oh, okay. Well,
but they were just listening to them week after week, you know, and their ideas. I thought, wow, this is really something.
and we probably knew the same women, and I
Right.
I admired their bravery. I
Right.
mean, the fact that they were out and they were speaking out and they were public about who they were. And that was so unusual back then. And I just admired their bravery. And I thought, oh, I could never, ever walk in their shoes, you know, and that's how scary it was for me.
Mhm.
So ultimately, as time went on, and I'm more and more okay with myself, but still not meeting anyone, as an educator, Virginia Uribe over at Fairfax High School in Los Angeles, who was a teacher and a counselor at the time, started up the Project 10 program, which was the nation's first public school-based program. And she described it as a dropout prevention program for, in those days, it was lesbian and gay students, but of course the umbrella spread to encompass bisexual, transgender, and queer.
So is the Project 10 still in existence?
No, it doesn't exist as we knew it then. But it was a groundbreaking program. It was 1984 when she started the program, and anybody who was in education, especially if they were LGBTQ, heard about Virginia Uribe and her program. And I was in such admiration for the work, like so many of us were, for the work she was doing. And the program got attacked by the Traditional Values Coalition. Reverend Lou Sheldon, who, by the way, was born into this world as an Orthodox Jew, converted and became a Presbyterian and became a reverend, but none of the churches would have him in their churches because he was so radical. So he started his own ministry called Traditional Values Coalition. And
So what, were you working as an educator at this time that all this was going on?
I was a teacher, and also during the 70s, we had Anita Bryant, if you remember.
I do.
And we had legislators here in California, Marion LaFollette and Newton Russell, and where they were trying to pass legislation to fire any teacher in the state of California who was perceived to be homosexual or who was homosexual. And so that proposed legislation drove people like me even further into the closet, because the fear of being found out could cost us our jobs, our careers, not just a job. It was
That happened in medicine too.
Yeah. And
So
so
the license
that was all going on. And so when Virginia Uribe started up this program, it was, my God, you know, what a brave woman, and she's saving kids' lives, and how can I be part of this? So I started. What happened was I was a health education teacher, and at the time I was teaching high school at Huntington Park High School. 99.9% Hispanic community or Latino community. There were, it was a year-round school, 4,000 students, 17 of them were Black, and 4 were white out of 4,000 students.
That's amazing.
And
so do you speak Spanish?
No.
No.
But we developed curriculum because we had a lot of students that were English as second learners. And we developed very clever curriculum materials for them to help them understand health concepts and to learn English at the same time.
That's so important.
Hugely successful, very successful. And I just loved it. And it was at that school that I invited Virginia Uribe to come and speak to my health classes. And she did. And that's how we initially met. But I met her prior to that when I brought up Lou Sheldon and the Traditional Values Coalition, because he launched an attack on the program, and he became her arch enemy. And there was a school board hearing, and there was media of every sort, radio, television, newspaper, and I was the president of a Health Educators Association that I helped to co-found, called California Association of School Health Educators, and the acronym is CASHI. And as the president of that organization, I spoke at those hearings to support the work she was doing. So although I had not met her at that time, I got to see her and hear her speak.
See her in action, right?
I was the first time in my life, and I was scared to death, that I ever spoke in a public forum. And this was a packed school board meeting. And so that was my first introduction to Virginia Uribe. And but there were elected officials, public health educators, Zev Yaroslavsky, who was, I think he was a supervisor at the time. We had parents and friends of lesbians and gays. We had students, and it was an amazing thing. And so Lou Sheldon's people were outnumbered 3-1. But because of that attack, the program got publicity, and people started sending money, checks made out to Project 10 and sending them to Fairfax High School, where she started the program. So she took that money and started a 501c3, Friends of Project 10. And I'll talk about that later, but it wasn't until 1980.
So did she speak Spanish?
No.
Well,
she taught at Fairfax High School, which was in those days when she first started at Fairfax, it was a largely Jewish population. And later it became extremely diverse with Iranian and just all kinds of ethnicities and backgrounds. But you did not need to speak Spanish to teach at Fairfax. So our teaching experiences were very diverse. I was inner city most of my life, and I was either all Black or all brown, or, you know, we call it monocultural. So I started with all white students and went to all Black students, and then went to all brown students. And then my final days in the classroom, finally, I was in a truly integrated classroom for the first time in my life. And that was the end of my teaching career, which was rather interesting. So, our backgrounds were very different in terms of our student populations that we served, but our philosophies of education paralleled one another, and we were both doing the same things in our classrooms. I was doing it in the inner city, and she was doing it at Fairfax, and that was preparing our students for college, because we knew, especially in my situation and the schools the kids were going to, if they didn't get these skills early on, they may not get them at all. And so that's a whole other story. So the way I met her was—
when did you become partners?
Pardon?
When did you become partners?
Well, I invited her to come speak in 1988, and that's the first time we met, and that was at Huntington Park High School. And she came and spoke to my class. She was busy, very busy, traveling all around the country and teaching. And so, but she came and spoke to my classroom in 1989, or I guess she spoke 1988, 89. And I took workshops from her, professional development, and what
She
happened
was lesbian,
1980, pardon?
She was lesbian.
Oh yeah, she was out. She was.
Did she
one of the
know that
early
you were
educators.
also?
I wasn't out yet.
I see.
She was one
Really?
of the early educators that came out, and that was a big deal, big deal. So I was not out yet. And what happened was, a year later, I learned from a colleague that she had broken up with her relationship of 14 years. And I thought, oh, well, and she was a real icon in the community, and I really respected her. And I thought, oh, well, maybe she could be my friend is what I was thinking, because we are 14 years apart. She was a grandmother. I had absolutely zero interest in getting into a relationship with her. I mean, she was just so admired and respected as an educator and being out and creating this program. So I wanted to become part of what she was doing. I wanted to get on the bandwagon. And so I contacted her and asked her if she would have dinner with me. And so we went out for dinner, and that evening, I should say that she hits on me, and I go, whoa, and it just took me aback.
What's
I was
happening
like,
here?
wow. Totally unexpected. It wasn't what I was expecting. And it was like Barbara Streisand coming to your house and, wanting to be in a relationship with you. And I'm going, oh my God. And so, to make a very long story
So
short,
what day was that? What day? What was the date?
it was May 19th, 1989.
So that's
Yeah.
coming up, huh?
May 19th, 1989. So that became our anniversary date, because we had no other marker. And we became a couple, and eventually she had to sell her house because of the breakup with her partner. And I was in a condominium in San Pedro that, I was there I wasn't planning to live there forever. So we agreed to buy a house together, that I would sell my condo. And we wound up living in the house that I'm in currently, and in the
Pasadena
area.
Huh.
And she grew up here. She grew up 2 streets away, and her mother was still living in the house at the time, and we grew very, very close as a family. Her mother was just a fabulous woman, and truly admired by everybody who knew her. And that's when I climbed on what I call the Project 10 bandwagon, and I got very involved, and wanted to support her work, and support the work we were doing with the nonprofit Friends of Project 10, which eventually grew into we had a scholarship program called Models of Excellence.
So how many people were in the groups that were supporting this sort of dream, making it a reality?
Well, there were no groups.
Uh-huh.
There were no groups. I mean, educators, parents, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, PFLAG LA played a critical role. She did a lot of workshops for educators and community groups. And so she always had speaker panels. And so there was always a PFLAG parent that spoke. Often there was a student that spoke. And so she trained educators, she trained parent groups, she went out and spoke to student groups. She spoke at Harvard University. She went all around the country, and
a lot of energy.
You're familiar with GLSEN, Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. So Kevin Jennings, who founded GLSEN, was a student at the time when she spoke to his class on the East Coast. And he went home, he'll tell you, he went home that night. He was so inspired by her talk that he went home and started the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, GLSEN, and became the executive director for many, many years. And he's currently the executive director of Lambda Legal now. And he spoke at her Celebration of Life event after she passed away. And he just, it was just an amazing talk. And so she touched hundreds and thousands of lives, all of it.
Right.
And her work became known internationally. And so people from Australia and England and Israel.
And you did too, by your association.
Came and they wrote papers and they interviewed her. And I conducted a workshop in Canada at their Outrights conference, and the nation of Canada, the country of Canada, adopted our materials and incorporated in them throughout the entire country. And when I saw that Canada legalized same-sex marriage before the United States did, I thought, good job, Gail. You did a good job.
Good. Give yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah. I really feel that we helped to contribute to that. I really do.
Right. That's what's interesting about this project. I'm learning all these things that were going on while I was doing other things. And it's fascinating,
Mhm.
the work that,
Yeah.
and the results, not only the work we've done, but the results.
Yeah, and so, and I think, our legacy or her legacy, for sure will be that she started the ball rolling. I mean, she had to meet up with the resistance, and she had to deal with the attacks, and she fought the battle very brilliantly in a way that I never could have done. And what happened is when she retired from the school district, from the LA Unified School District, well, with the project, going back to the Project 10 program, that started up in response to a student having been attacked by two or three boys at Fairfax High School for being gay. It was harassed and beaten up, and the kids were suspended, and the boy that was targeted for the attack, a young African-American boy named Chris, never came back to school after the suspension. The two boys that attacked him did. And this was sort of the incident that threw the kids over the edge. And it was actually the students that sought her out. She was a counselor at the time. And they sought her out and said, we need to do something about this. We are just, being harassed and discriminated against and unfairly punished because we are who we are, and we need to take a stand. We need to do something. And they started meeting informally, talking about these issues. And the reason they sought her out is not because she was not out at the time, and she happened to be, she had been married to a man. She did have a family with him, and they ultimately did divorce, but she was not out as a lesbian. But she was a counselor who believed in liberty and justice for all, and she had that bumper sticker on her car.
Did she?
And when in the days of the 60s and 70s, when they started to form Black student unions, the students, not having any Black faculty at Fairfax High School, the Black students at Fairfax High School sought her out to be the club advisor for their Black student union club, because of her principles of liberty and justice for all. And she gave voice to that. And so she was their club advisor before she started Project 10. And it's for that reason that the kids who were LGBTQ sought her out and said, we need help, because we know of your core values, your beliefs in liberty and justice for all. They had no idea she was lesbian. And so they started to meet on a regular basis, and they said, well, we need to call ourselves something. And back then it
We
wasn't
need a name.
Yeah, back then you couldn't call yourselves the Gay and Lesbian Student Support Group. That wouldn't fly. So Alfred Kinsey had done his research in the male prison population, and with prisoners.
You must have had a household of interesting
homosexual.
people.
Pardon?
You must have had a household of interesting people.
Oh yeah. So he's the one who came up with the 10% of the population is gay and 5% is bisexual, and 85% is heterosexual based on his results. So that's where that 10% came from, and was used for very many years. And we know now that that's not necessarily the case, that sexuality is much more fluid than that. But it was a very restricted study. But anyway, so she came up with the name Project 10 based on the Kinsey study of 10% of the population.
I see. Now we know how that evolved.
Is gay or lesbian. So that's how that came.
Yeah.
And so what happened is student support groups started popping up in high schools throughout the district, and it was not organized. There was no particular training. There was no curriculum, but I led student support groups, and then finally it became more organized under the district's title for the Safe and Drug-Free Schools program. It was a federally funded program. called Safe and Drug-Free Schools, Title IV, and it was their impact program. They were support groups for students at risk for substance abuse. And so the person who succeeded me, because I wound up taking over Virginia's position as the Project 10 advisor for the district. And we made it in when she retired in 1998. And we made it into a full, now she ran it, mind you, she was still teaching in the classroom. There was no money in the program. They gave her 3 periods off eventually so she could run Project 10, but there was no structure, no budget, no nothing. She just became the resource person for the district. And when she retired, I said, well, we can't have this. This needs to be a full-time position.
Right.
And so I took it over in 1998 and I went downtown, and they didn't really know what to do with me. They had me in all different offices. I even worked out of my home for a year. And I probably worked harder out of my home than I did when I was at a school. But anyway, we created anti-bias trainings. We provided resources for the entire school district. We reached out to.
Did you ever sleep?
Pardon?
Did you ever sleep?
I can tell you this, I did not take lunch breaks.
I know, it sounds like.
I was
low
putting
room,
in,
you know,
I was easily putting in 10 to 12-hour work days.
it sounds like it.
Lunch breaks. And because I was
Thank
the
you.
sole person for the second largest school district in the country, which
Right.
was bigger than many of our cities and some of the populations in our states. And it was just ongoing. And then of course we had Friends of Project 10, the nonprofit, running at the same time. So we had to raise money. We had to fund our scholarship program. We were producing this Models of Pride conference.
So what gave you the energy to keep going other than your
Passion.
commitment? Huh?
Passion.
Passion.
And
What
coming from
fueled
my
your
own
passion?
Well,
Was it
coming
your
from my own
relationship?
experience. And we didn't want another kid to commit suicide.
Oh, I
And
know.
keep in mind too, that she started the program at the height of the HIV/AIDS
Wow,
epidemic.
yeah.
And nobody was giving voice to AIDS. You know, our elected officials were not. Ronald Reagan was president at the time. And because it was only gay men at the time that were affected, presumably, and dying from it, there was no federal funding for research. And it wasn't until the Ryan White Act, a 12-year-old young white boy who contracted HIV, who ultimately died from AIDS, complications from AIDS, was the Ryan White Act that compelled Congress to fund research for HIV/AIDS. And so hundreds and thousands of gay men died and suffered as a result of this, and it was intolerable. And so she had a bulletin board that she kept in her classroom, and she would cut out the obituaries every day from the LA Times and post them on her bulletin board.
Are you familiar with the Chris Brownlee Hospice?
Oh yeah, yeah, all of it.
I
Yeah.
volunteered there. And when we started this project, when we returned to LA full time, I said I wanted to go and find the garden that was part of that.
Yeah.
And we found the structure, the building, it was totally empty, but the garden is totally overgrown with weeds and you call it. I mean, Marge almost fell into the fountain, which was defunct because it was so overgrown with weeds. I think that it's sort of, you know how you have these things that sort of buzz around in your mind once in a while. And I think how awful if I would have brought something there for someone and it wasn't cared for. I don't know what happens. It went over to the city of Los Angeles.
It would be
It was
interesting.
a beautiful space.
What has happened to that garden, because it's historical.
Yeah, well, it's an historical.
It's part of our history. So I bring the bulletin board up because it was now 3 layers thick with obituaries cut out, and they were small obituaries cut out from the LA Times. And so when a reporter would come in, and Virginia was interviewed a lot. She was on
Mhm.
TV and on radio and newspapers, and just there's a whole archive worth of articles and interviews. But if the interview ever took place in her classroom, she always made sure she sat in front of that bulletin board, and it would force the
Huh.
reporter or the journalist to ask about that bulletin board. So she was giving voice, and one of the few people at the time giving voice to HIV/AIDS and what was happening. Basically, it was a Holocaust on the gay community, and as a result of that, the gay male community, they knew who she was, and she was their icon. And I am not exaggerating when I tell you that we could be walking down the street, let's say in West Hollywood, and a gay man would recognize her, and they would get down on their knees and they would kiss her feet.
Really? Wow.
And that is not an exaggeration. We had an experience in New York where the doorman of the hotel, I was obviously gay, and I just had to say to him, "Have you ever heard of Project 10?" And we're in New York, and he goes, "Oh yes, Virginia Uribe," and he's going on and on. And I said, "Well, you're looking at her." And as soon as I said that, he fell to his knees and kissed her feet.
Whoa.
And that night we had a bucket of a very nice wine in our room. And that doorman and I, he no longer has his job there because the hotel closed down. That doorman and I have remained friends all these years.
Really wonderful.
Yes,
What a great
yes.
story.
They
Huh?
were so grateful
Yeah.
for the work she did, and that she gave voice to this. I call it a pandemic, and it was a pandemic because,
Right.
of course, we know ravaged communities throughout the world,
Mhm.
and continues to do so.
So how did all this energy and organization impact your relationship with her?
Well, our life was focused on Project 10. I mean, we would wake up in the morning and the first thing we're talking about, I'm not exaggerating, would be Project 10. And it got to a point where I said to her, and we called her Gina, not Virginia, we called her Gina. And I said, "Gina, I think we need to make a rule, and that Sunday will be date day." And on
Right.
Sundays, unless we're attending an event, which often we did because she was honored by every imaginable organization. Our first 2 years together, I'm not exaggerating, we were running to event after event where she would get award after award, sometimes 2 events in one day. I said, we have to set time aside just for ourselves. And we have to call it date day. And on Sundays, we cannot discuss Project 10
Were you
unless we,
successful?
which we always did. And we should do something nice for ourselves, go to a movie, go out to dinner, go to a concert, do something, take a drive.
Something about us.
And we really did try to do that, but it was challenging. And of course, the emails would come in, the phone calls come in, and we always had an event around the corner.
bet,
We always had to raise money, or she was being honored somewhere. But
What happened to her?
pardon?
She died? You said
Well, she died due to health complications at the age of 85. She actually outlived what we thought would be her life expectancy, because she did have some very serious health issues, but she died at age 85 on March 30th, 2019. So not long ago. But there are 2 things that I'm extremely proud of amongst everything else, and that is that the National Education Association created an award in her name called the Virginia Uribe Creative Leadership Award in Human Rights. And we were flown, I believe it was 2012, and it was the LGBT caucus of the NEA, the National Education Association, that established this award in her honor. And we were flown to Washington, D.C. with her mother and her sister for the celebration. And there are educators now that every year are awarded that award, the Virginia Uribe Creative Leadership Award in Human Rights. by the NEA. So I'm very proud of that
Mhm.
because her legacy lives on through that. And secondly, the thing, if you were interviewing her right now and you asked her, what are you most proud of? I know what she would say, and that is the day that she was taking a nap and I was at the computer in our home office and the phone rang, and it was Jennifer from the White House calling. And this is when Barack Obama was president. Okay. I'm going, oh, Jennifer from the White House. Okay. And is Virginia Reby there? I said, well, yes, one moment, please. And I had to wake her up from her nap. And I go, Jennifer from the White House is on the phone. I would
You have
like
time for it?
you. And she looks at me like, are you effing kidding me? I go, well, it's Jennifer from the White House. I think you should take it. And the first thing she says, she introduces herself, and the first thing Gina says to her is, I just want you to know that we pay our cleaning lady Social Security taxes.
In case that's what this is about.
And Jennifer from the White House just starts laughing, and she says, no, that's not why I'm calling. Thank you for doing that. Well, she had been nominated for the Presidential Citizenship Award under the Obama administration. And they had vetted her, and Jennifer called her back, and they had really vetted her. They knew everything about her.
Really?
And she became a finalist for that award.
Mhm.
And although she did not get the award, it was in her heart the highest honor that she could have received. And I just wanted to share that. And it is.
It's wonderful.
I'm very proud of that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, but I don't know if you have any other questions or would like to know more.
How did her notoriety, did it energize you? Did it restrict you?
What I felt that she deserved every bit of
Recognition.
recognition. The word is recognition. She was very humble, and she was not comfortable in her own skin with the attention. And she was always very eloquent in her acceptances, and she always nailed her message right on, and she could do it in 30 seconds. If she was given 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes, she nailed it. And that was, and her message was pointed and it got across and it was impactful. In terms of how did it impact me, I felt that she earned every moment of it, and that the more people recognized her, the more the message gets
That's
out
right.
to the people.
Mhm.
So it wasn't about her, it was about the work she had done and the messages she was sending. And a very important thing was that she never ever defended herself, because the program did get attacked. And
Of course, right.
she never put herself in the position of having to defend what she did. So if she had been asked, well, how do you feel about people who oppose Project 10 and call it a recruitment program for homosexuals and so on, her response was, well, I think these people just have a bad heart, and who would not want a child to succeed in school? Comments like that. So it just diffused it. And how does the opposition come back? I mean, it makes them look totally foolish and stupid and ignorant and uncaring and not compassionate when it comes to children. So she was brilliant in the way she went forward. And it wasn't just LGBT issues. She also, during the height of the AIDS epidemic, approached the school board, and Jackie Goldberg, who was on the school board at the time, said, you know, we've got to do something. We need to have a condom distribution program. And not only did the district, and I participated in that too, but I didn't even know Virginia Reby at the time. We were doing that as health educators, supporting the condom distribution program for the Yale Unified School District. But she took it like 3 more steps, and that is, well, we need to have condom distributions in every school, in every high school, and okay, and we need to send pamphlets home to the parents, and they need to be in all the different languages. We need all that. And so she just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until the Board of Education supported all of it. But I'm not sure it would have happened without her insistence.
Did you get married?
We inform the parents that we have brochures and materials in all the languages, so that all children and all parents and guardians in the district understood the importance of this, and to educate them about that. So we often had conversations about the reason we are successful. One of the reasons, because many organizations and programs would emerge and fail. They try to do this and they would fail, but we succeeded, we prevailed. And we said, we put our egos aside. We don't let our egos get in the way of the work we're doing. And what we found is, in many organizations that tried to have a scholarship program, for instance, or they tried to produce a conference, or they tried to produce a prom. We had the LGBTQ youth prom, was the first in the nation. We don't allow our egos.
I went to that prom.
You were there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Marge and I were both there, right?
Were you a volunteer?
It was great.
We had a lot of volunteers, adult volunteers, and we just set our egos aside. And so if Virginia's getting attention, that's fine. If I'm getting attention, that's fine. But we're not doing the work we're doing in order to seek attention. It's just, we got attention because of what we were doing. And I think we both handled it very well. And we have seen people at the same events where she was honored who were, they were just so enveloped by the intention, they couldn't get enough of it. They were given, and I know you've experienced this, and many people who are going to see this will know what I'm talking about, that you're given 2 minutes for your acceptance speech and they go on for 20 minutes. And of course, the audience loses the message altogether because they're talking about themselves for 20 minutes.
People don't have that long 20-minute extension.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah, right.
And then you don't know what they said, but if you can nail it in 2 minutes, you're going to remember it.
So you mentioned at the start of our meeting today that you were still struggling with the loss of your relationship.
Well, I think more,
which I would expect.
Actually, because of the health issues and so on, I actually started, and the whole family did, the grief process. We knew we were losing her, and her passing, in a sense, was a relief because she was no longer suffering. I mean, she really was suffering toward the end, and her quality of life was greatly diminished. And it was not the way she would have chosen to live her life. And she made that decision, that it's time, it's, I'm done. We know we can't live forever. And she clearly wanted to be put out of the miserable situation she was in. And, if you've ever gone through that death process with a loved one, it's very difficult. And sometimes it is just a relief that they are now done with the suffering, and that now we need to move on in our lives, and so on and so forth. And so I can truly say that I'm not grieving, but certainly I treasure the time that we had together, and it enriched my life, certainly. And I'm proud. I know we touched thousands of lives, and I feel amazing about that. continue to try and give voice to issues and to support issues that I'm passionate about. And so I can feel proud for doing that, I have stuck to my core values and beliefs and principles, and I don't waver from that.
So you're still working.
There's no such thing as retirement.
I noticed that. This is one of my mistakes in this program. I thought, well, we should talk about retirement. So right.
What's that?
Yeah. So I gathered like 4 women, and I thought we couldn't do it because they're not retired. They don't. And I thought lesbians do not retire. So
well,
there's no retirement package. In
even
this,
with Friends of Project 10, I mean, I didn't make any money doing that work. We did it out of passion. And
you wanted to do it. It stimulates you. It's interesting.
And so now I'm involved with the Pasadena chapter of the League of Women Voters, and I'm on the Education Committee, and I support various causes, and I stay active, but at a different level. And I'm, of course, a year after her passing, the pandemic hit, and so now I'm in the process of what we call reclaiming my life. And we did close down, we dissolved Friends of Project 10 at the end of 2019. And thankfully we did, because we never would have survived the pandemic. We were too small a nonprofit. And then of course, and just dealing with the aftermath of death, there's a lot of work to be done with regard to the house and the estate and so on. And we traveled extensively. We had a rich life together. We went to plays and concerts and so on. And so now I'm in the process of sort of reclaiming that for myself. I'm giving myself permission to travel and to go to concerts and plays and be out in the world. I wasn't able to do a lot of that while she was sick.
Right.
And then the pandemic hit. So it's been a long time.
Very long.
Yeah. Well, I think it's wonderful that you've both taken on this project, and
thank you.
It will keep you busy and it will keep you engaged, and you will learn so much and you'll share so much.